As I'm here working with this group of small antique singing bowls, I wanted to highlight again the aging process, the dating process that I've developed with the help of museum and university experts around the world, and to explain how the bowls fall into a historical timeline and how we determined that timeline. Well, the first thing is that we made the connection metallurgically and culturally to earlier types of bowls from ancient Persia and ancient Khorasan. Now, these were cultures that were along the ancient Buddhist Silk Roads through ancient Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, India, all the way to ancient Persia and beyond. And the metalworking tradition was imported all the way to Asia across the Silk Road from ancient Persia. Now, it's well known that bronze making was developed in China and developed in Southeast Asia and developed in ancient Persia, the centers of culture where both copper and tin were found together. This is where bronze was developed in the Bronze Age. We're thousands of years past that already with the singing bowls into the period of brisk trade going along the Silk Road, where technology was also brought across to Nepal from Persia, not as people would assume from China to Nepal, but from ancient Persia along the Silk Roads. We get the singing bowls. And we know that because metallurgically, the early types are distinctly the same as those earlier bowls from Persia and Khorasan. Not only that, but the way they're hammered, the heat, the metallurgy, and the way that they are decorated also match. So we know, you can see in my book, The Singing Bowl Book, I put photos side by side of some of those early Persian bowls with the later Himalayan bowls, and we know that that's the start date for the ancient singing bowls. So those early singing bowls, some of which I call like the circle and dot singing bowls or the special engraved singing bowls, and some of the other early types, those are all the ones before the 15th, 16th century, which were made with distinctly different manufacturing processes from the bowls that come after that point. So we know that early Persian bowls are from around the 9th, 10th century up until the 12th century. So I put the start date for the singing bowls, being generous, I put it at the end of that, at the 12th century. Now, it may very well be that the earliest singing bowls are much earlier than that. We have Greek bowls that look very, very similar to singing bowls that go back a couple thousand years earlier. So there is a possibility that those Persian bowls are earlier and that the singing bowls are actually earlier than we think. So maybe the 10th century, the singing bowls started. The 12th century date works out culturally very well as well. So I put the start there. And then we have a development later from Southeast Asia, which I've talked about elsewhere and also written about in the Singing Bowl book, where the technology changes and the singing bowls adopt a new type of hammering, a new metallurgy from Southeast Asia, from around current day Cambodia, Laos, Thailand. The technology was imported, again, possibly over Buddhist trade routes, brought up to Nepal, and we've got an easier way of making the bowls, which transitions, and I have what I call the transitional period around the 16th century, where we see some mixing of styles, some of the old, some of the new, where some of the bowls seem to adopt the new style, yet retain some of the early manufacturing styles. Here's an example of a bowl that seems to be made with some of the new technology, but still retains the old folding technique. So it's what I call the transitional period. And then we clearly see that there's a demarcation again into the late bowls, where they're no longer folded at the rim. They're no longer made with the same decorative motifs. Everything shifts and we get into a new phase with larger numbers of bowls made in a very different way, which again, we found metallurgically to be the case. It's not just me looking at the bowls and figuring this out. I actually worked with scientists all the way up to the archaeological metallurgists at Oxford using electron microscopes to understand the metallurgy of these objects, as well as traveling to 10 different countries and going working with museum experts from San Francisco to Tokyo and everywhere in between to learn everything I could over 25 years about the history, how they were made, where they came from, and the timeline. So that's what I want to get to, is more about the timeline. Is how we know that they started back then is from that connection to the earlier Persian bowls. How we know that they transitioned is because of the what we know of the technology coming from Southeast Asia. And I found those bowls as well in Southeast Asia, in temples out in the middle of nowhere in Thailand, and even in the National Museum in Cambodia. I found those bowls from Southeast Asia, which are identical to the late period singing bowls. So we know when those were made, and that takes us up to a pretty recent date. That takes us up to the 19th century. And Nepal was a closed culture. The new singing bowls weren't really starting to be made until the tourist trade picked up. So there's a few gaps in the history where the singing bowls either were made in very few numbers or they stopped being made for a time. And then we get this resurgence today where there's more bowls now being made than ever because of the large number that are being exported around the world today. So these are the three periods of the singing bowls. The early singing bowls, which are based on the Persian bowls, which are some of the most finely crafted examples with the very unique folded construction, very beautiful detail work, beautiful deep engraving work, really exceptional. The transitional period into the late period singing bowls, and a lot of the best singing bowls were made in this period. You may think that the older ones are the best, but actually it took them a while to develop the craft and get to the best bowls. And then there's a high period around the 16th, 17th century where the very fine, most finely crafted pieces were made. And then things got a little bit more mass produced with the late period bowls, and there's a larger number of pieces being made in a more rustic, less detailed manner. They didn't have to fold the metal anymore. They had a new technique to finish the edge. They didn't do the deep engravings anymore, probably because they were making the bowls a lot thinner, and that may have been just to save weight. So there were reasons that the technology advanced, which I talk about in my articles, my book, and in my other videos. There are reasons they were made the way that they were. There were reasons even why they were decorated the way that they were. And there are reasons that things changed over time, all of which I've put together in this comprehensive history of the singing bowls, where I now understand every step of the way, every century, what they were making, how they were making it, how they changed, why they changed. We've even been able to trace it down to individual workshops and in some cases individual makers. I can see the generational shifts from the grandfather to the next generation to the next generation of makers, and the stamp that each of those individual makers made on these wonderful bowls hundreds of years ago. By looking at so many bowls in so many ways over such a long period of time, I've been able to put together this whole history. It's all laid out in these videos and in the Singing Bowl Museum website. And of course, I'll be coming out with a new book in the future. So please stay tuned for that. Enjoy the bowls. You can explore them by looking at each category, bowls by type, at singingbowlmuseum.com. Each type was made in a different period. You can also narrow them by the date and see what was made in the earlier centuries, what was made in the later centuries, and how they differ. You can look by the size, by the notes. There's different ways you can sort the bowls and explore this collection. Also be sure to click where it says out of stock. Unless you're shopping for them, if you click to see the out of stock bowls, you get a lot more historical information because you see all of the bowls that have already been dispersed to collectors since I started the museum project. And you can also use the compare feature and put your own little sets together and combine them in many ways that you want. So there's actually a lot you can do by exploring the website and enjoy this fantastic collection.